Well, they're in the back.
She's in there.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Hollywood Planning Commission meeting, Thursday, December 7th, 2017. David, can you call the meeting? I'm going to lead the Pledge of Allegiance myself tonight. My first turn. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hang on, George.
David, could you call the roll, please?
Good evening. Commissioner Hoopengarner,
Present.
Commissioner Cavallaro, Commissioner Bass. Here. Commissioner Elchel.
Here.
Commissioner Guy.
Here.
Vice Chair Jones.
Here.
Chair Buckner.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is number 4, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Chair, I'd like to recommend a change to the agenda.
Okay.
We are having an issue regarding calculations for the affordable housing for the Sweetser item, and we would like to recommend continuing that to a date certain of January 18th,
January 18th.
2018.
Okay, is there a motion to move that, to continue that matter?
Vice Chair Jones. Thank you, and the motion passes. The agenda is passed as amended.
Thank you very much. So that means then we have only one full hearing here. Is that correct? And that would be 10A. So we're going on then to item 5, approval of the minutes of the last meeting, which was November 16th, 2017.
And the minutes are approved as presented unanimously.
The next item is item 16. This is a time when we have general comments from the public. Those of you who have taken a speaker slip, do we have some?
We have one item, George Bjorski.
Mr. Dorsey, would you please come to the podium, state your name and city of residence? And you have 3 minutes.
My name is George Bjorski,
Mis-
and I'm a resident of West Hollywood.
Could you wait till you come to the podium so we can actually all hear you? Thank you.
Does my time start running now?
It starts after you settle down and we give you some time.
My name is George Bjorski. I'm a resident of West Hollywood. More specifically, I'm a resident of East West Hollywood, where there's been a growing number of residential development and residential development requests for approval. In my neighborhood, which is still more to the point, there have been a lot of some approvals, some about to be approved, and some in the pipeline, and a number of vacated properties, especially the golden single stories, single family residences. In my neighborhood, and I said neighborhood, the neighborhood is Stanley, Genesee, Ogden, Romaine, Willoughby. There's been a massive concentration of the approvals, et cetera, which I mentioned above. You can believe me or not believe me, since people in my neighborhood do not tend to appear before the commission. Nobody in my neighborhood wants this wave of development. There have been some happy people. The former owners and heirs of the single-story buildings have left very happy for getting a price over market. It is hard for members of the public to oppose applications or even comment on applications in process or up for approval. First, the developer proposals, if you read them, and staff approvals and so on, in process, for the ordinary person are rather complex. In fact, extremely complex. Waivers, density bonus law. There's really even not a, I'm not aware of any definition yes, okay, for affordable housing. I guess my own, could I just continue? I'm the only speaker.
I'll give you another minute, okay?
Okay.
And that's it.
So I think it's important for the public to be informed. Some of you are lawyers. If the law firm is large enough, I don't know whether it's pro bono work. If you could put together some of these things that keep coming up. In one of the minutes, a commissioner said that he had visited the site. I respectfully request that all commissioners do that. You'd get a sense and a feeling for the neighborhood. You get a sense of what the new building would do to that neighborhood. I know you're extremely busy, but I think this is quite important. The details of the building to come up for approval change all the time. It's sort of like we go through the same bulk, but with slight tweaking of the packages. In one subcommittee meeting, there were 3 proposals all packed into one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you still want to speak to us, you can take another speaker slip at the end. Thank you. Moving on to item number 7 is the director's report. Mr. Kehoe.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I'm John Kehoe, Interim Director for Community Development. I want to give you an update on the items that were on Monday's council agenda that were applicable to the Planning Commission. So the City Council approved the zone text amendments for the accessory dwelling units. They did make one change. They clarified the ordinance or made the ordinance applicable, so any single family home in any zone, multifamily, or R2 through R4, could also have the use of an accessory dwelling unit. So that was one minor change that they made to that. The City Council also approved the development agreement and extensions for the project at 9001 Santa Monica Boulevard. And then the City Council also approved the zone text amendments to implement those 2 new zoning districts, the R4BC along just south of Beverly and R3CC along Fairfax. So those 2 were approved. On the next City Council meeting, there's one item that didn't come to the Planning Commission recently, but it did go to the Planning Commission quite some time ago, and that was for a tall wall on the side of the Mondrian. The tall wall, I believe it's on the west side, was approved in a different way, and so its CUP actually expires, and so it's going back to the City Council for an extension. And in the language of that CUP, it was required to come back to the City Council for extensions, and that's why it skipped Planning Commission. But that's on the agenda for the next council agenda.
Thank you. We have a question.
John, what is the reason that the item with respect to the off-site parking spaces at the Grafton is being continued indefinitely?
David might be able to answer that one, the Grafton parking lot.
Yeah, they were still working on securing other off-site parking. That was part of it, so they needed some extra time to do that.
I thought the reason they brought it was that they didn't need the off-site parking.
It's a combination of both. There will still be a small amount of off-site, but it'll be an overall reduction in what's required.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Thank you, Mr. Cahill. Next item is item number 8. Any items from commissioners at this point?
I just wanted
Commissioner
to,
Bass?
I wanted to report that I was appointed to the TDM working group, so I've been meeting with them. We've had 2 meetings representing the Planning Commission. Nothing more to report except that we're providing feedback, and they're going to bring us a draft ordinance to look at in our meeting early in the new year, so I'll have more to report then. But I wanted to report to all of you that I have been attending those meetings and will go again early in the year.
Thank you very much for doing that. Transportation Task Force.
Can you remind me what TDM stands for? Transportation Demand Management. Okay.
There's no items tonight on the consent calendar, so we'll move on to public hearings. And we have one, well, actually we have 2, but number 10A is 1201 and 1207 North Detroit. And Lori, are you going to give the staff report?
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. Before you tonight is a project that was continued from the November 2nd Planning Commission meeting, which is a request to construct a new 4-story, 10-unit multifamily condominium building over on-grade parking on 2 adjacent parcels that are both currently vacant at 1201 and 1207 North Detroit. The proposed project will not incorporate any affordable housing units within the project and instead pay the in lieu affordable housing fee. The applicant also requests a modification for a 10% reduction in the front yard setback. The corner property at 1201 North Detroit is vacant, and the adjacent lot at 1207 North Detroit previously had 3 dwelling units, which were declared a public nuisance, and both projects are currently vacant. The proposed multifamily building has been carefully designed and articulated. As such, staff has deemed the building to be of exemplary design. It is uniquely 3-dimensional and addresses the corner lot with openness and interest, and will be a positive addition to the corner of Detroit and Lexington. There was discussion at the last meeting of the wall and fence around the perimeter of the property. The applicant felt it necessary to keep the wall per neighbor request at the neighborhood meeting, and so they lowered the wall around the perimeter of the property along Lexington and Detroit to 48 inches in height with a landscape buffer in front of the wall. The applicant requests a modification to reduce the front yard setback by 10% from the required 18 feet 3 inches to 16 feet 5 inches. Staff supports the front yard setback modification request as the building is located on a corner parcel, and the building adjacent to the subject property to the north is a 20-unit multifamily building with a 14.7-foot front yard setback. The average of the front yard setbacks along this block of North Detroit is approximately 15.95 feet. So the modification request of 16 feet 5 inches will allow the front yard setback to be in line with other buildings on this block. The project provides 90 green building points, which have been reviewed by our building and safety plan check engineer and will be thoroughly reviewed in its entirety once the plans have been submitted to building and safety. Overall, the proposed project meets the general plan goals and the multifamily development standards, is well suited for this subject site, is thoughtfully designed, and is complementary to the context of the neighborhood. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the project. Lastly, staff has received 4 emails in support of the project that have been provided to you tonight. That concludes my presentation, and staff and the project architect are here for any questions that you may have.
Okay. Any questions of staff on the item? Then we'll move on to the public portion of the hearing. We have our applicant coming forward. Before we go any further, are there any disclosures on this item? Go ahead. Huh? You were on visit the site, Mr. Bass?
Prior to our last meeting, I spoke with the applicant and I visited the site.
Thank you. Jean, none? Vice Chair?
I visited the site. I don't know that I need to disclose that, but I'm happy to state it for the public record.
David? Lynn?
I visited the site.
Thank you. And I drove by the site to check it out, but not a normal disclosure. Thank you very much. Would you, as you know, you've been here before. You have 10 minutes to address the commission on this project in the beginning. Then we'll have some public speakers, if there are any, and then you'll have an opportunity to rebut for 5 minutes. Speakers will have 3 minutes each. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Andrea Keller. I'm the architect for this project, and I'm a resident of Los Angeles. I wanted to start with the fence issue. That's something that we do defer to the Commission. We've had, at our neighborhood meeting, there was a lot of concern about the neighbors wanting a fence around, and it was actually the primary comment that we received at our neighborhood meeting. That said, we understand the desire for openness, and we are proposing a split the baby approach with a lower fence, still with a landscape both in front of the fence and behind it, or it's 42 inches, it could be 36. We are open to discussion on this. When we first had put up the fence, because of the neighbors, we met with Stephanie Reich at the time, and she thought perhaps we could put a bench along the street as an amenity. We took that back to the neighbors, and they lost it, and they said, please do not do this to our neighborhood because of the transient problems in the neighborhood. So I know that this is a neighborhood that's rapidly changing, and I wanted to, let it, what we've tried to do is, listen to the neighbors, but also we do defer to commission. So I'll follow you on that. I wanted to address the balconies. The balconies had previously been enclosed. Technically, the definition of enclosure, if there are two walls, then it's not enclosed other than by railings. So in all cases where we did have an extra wall, that has been removed. So the balconies are now fully compliant with the code, and in terms of projection and also in terms of enclosure. There was a question from, I have a list of questions from Commissioner Hoopengarner, which I'll address next. I'll go through the staff comments. In terms of aging in place, we do plan, there is space for an elevator in the front. We are not planning on providing it, but it is possible. I've heard neighbors say that that isn't so great because you're just getting a shout, but it's actually difficult to design a space that has room for an elevator. So that was a concern, and that's something that we've allowed for in the plan. The parking spaces, there has always been a curb cut on the Lexington side in the rear, and we had always intended to use that as a parking space. This is something that we have cleared with transportation, and that curb cut, which is existing, I can show you a picture. You can see that the curb cut there would also be used for the trash removal, which is in the rear of the property. So that is the guest space. We've resolved all the plan inconsistencies. We went over everything very carefully with Lori, including the trash, parking spaces, and we've identified which are the canopy trees. We've made that very clear on the landscape plans, and we've assured that our green points are exact and specific. I'd like to quickly also address Commissioner Hoopengarner's comments. So by right, these types of projects are allowed to have 2 curb cuts. By code, there are 2 parcels, and it is permitted. So Public Works has reviewed this, and Transportation, and they did approve this. The differences between these balconies and the ones on 826 Kings, which were enclosed, we've removed a wall that technically enclosed them. So we've opened up one more side in response to that. Regarding the stairwells to the roof, there was concern that if we needed to, that the stairwells would rise out of the mass and be enclosed. The stairwells were something that were removed. The enclosure was removed very early in the process because of the height. So we are planning on having access to the stairs on the master bedroom level. And here on the plan, you can see that in each case, there is a door. There is a roof essentially on the 4th floor, and it is an outdoor space and would have to be waterproofed accordingly. But we do plan on having a glass atrium type, which would also illuminate that floor. But there is no plan now or future of having any enclosure that goes up to the roof. There had been a concern about the partition walls on the roof. There are no horizontal overhangs, and there are only 6-foot dividing walls between the roof gardens, and these are, unless you're very far away, they're not visible because they're set back from the street. Okay, and I believe that's all of your questions. If not, please clarify. Thank you.
Is that,
Oh, sorry, that's it.
That's it. Lynn?
So, yeah, let
were
me know if you have more
your questions
questions.
addressed to your satisfaction?
Sorry. I think so. I think my only condition on this would be to amend the resolution to just simply say that if you do decide that for structural reasons or water reasons you do need to do roof projections, that it would come back because it would be a significant change.
Oh,
to the-
understood, yeah, we
Okay.
don't want
So
the
I would like that
projections
to be
either.
incorporated in the resolutions, that should that change happen, it'll be obviously a significant change. It would fundamentally change what we voted on. And so if that could be a condition here, then, if it doesn't happen, then great, move forward. But I think I'm looking forward to seeing this in application because I'm a little perplexed as to how that's going to work, but that's great. And if you need to change it, then just come back.
So the rendering on the front of our packet with the drawings, has that been changed because it doesn't show any landscaping in front of the wall? It doesn't show the wall as you're suggesting that you would be willing to do that.
On the screen, I believe this is the same one. There is a planting bed. It shows repeating plants, so those may not show very well, but we are showing a planter which,
Oh, those little plants in the front?
yes, so, understanding that those would be better plants in
Bigger
real
plants.
life would grow and not be so uniform. But the minimum is 18 inches that we've set it back. And this was also to allow more space on the sidewalk for people walking side by side or walking dogs and kind of to improve the sidewalk condition.
Okay.
So we would like to.
All right. Has that been added into the resolution, her proposal with regard to the wall in front, around the building?
It's not currently a condition of approval.
It's not a current condition, so, okay. So that's something we need to address if we want it.
If you want to limit the height of the fence or the wall, as of now, according to the plans, you'd be approving the plans tonight, and the plans as they are before you are 48 inches in height.
48 inches.
42, sorry.
42, I'm
42.
sorry. Yes.
42 inches.
Let me ask a question. You said you set it back 18 inches to improve the sidewalk experience.
Yes.
The planter boxes are set back 18 inches, or the wall is set back?
The wall is set back.
Because if those planter boxes are right up against the sidewalk, then it's essentially the same width sidewalk. That's why I'm asking.
We could lower them to ground level, so there is more space. I mean, I was thinking of elbows and people walking side by side.
Right.
So with bags and that, but that's certainly something that we could do, is bring that down to ground level to effectively widen it.
So it'd be just a planter bed next to the
A
sidewalk?
planter bed. We were following the example of West Hollywood West, and that being their new requirement because of their narrow sidewalks.
Okay,
Any
thanks.
other questions, comments? Okay, thank you. Do we have
I'm sorry, yes.
one more? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
6 point, I lost my place here. We got hedges in our resolution, but I don't think we have hedges in our plans anymore. 7.14. Should be a minimum of 6-foot-tall landscape hedge.
Yes, that's the intention. I don't have the landscape plan in mind, but I believe, yes, that is our intention, to have a 6-foot hedge.
It is an intention?
It is.
Around the entire perimeter of the property?
The north and the west side.
Yes, it says entire perimeter. That's,
Okay, so that would be two
Yeah.
sides, yeah.
yeah. So that would need to be amended to reflect the plans.
Yeah, only the party walls.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have one speaker, Steve Levin. You'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Levin. Thank you.
Hi, Steve Levin, West Hollywood, and I live on Formosa, directly behind this property. And I apologize, I'm going to try not to cough in this microphone. I'm getting over a horrible cold, as I think everyone sort of is. Very much in favor of this project. It's beautiful. I think when we on the east side were talking about sort of deserving a higher quality standard of architecture, I think this is exactly what we were talking about. I'm really quite blown away by the architecture of this. I think it's going to be a beautiful addition to an always improving neighborhood. You know, it's just very exciting for us on the east side. While I have this extra time to say all the improvements have been so positive, and whosever decision it was to allow the previous house to be torn down, thank you. Literally overnight, problems have diminished because of that one thing. So we're very much excited for new neighbors to join the neighborhood. As far as the wall, yes, I was one of those also. While the neighborhood is getting much better, we do still have issues, and I think it makes everyone feel a little bit more comfortable just to know that there is a level of security there that doesn't detract from the overall appeal of the project. So I'm very much in favor of it, and that's it. Thank you. I did well.
Thank you for your comments. No other speakers? Okay. Applicant, do you want to come forward and address the commission again, or are you okay? Okay, then I think I'll close the public hearing, and we can deliberate or move on to a motion if we want. Okay. Vice Chair?
Thank you. I just want a couple of things that I want to state for the record. They're not so much questions, or there's something kind of, I guess, legally speaking. A second curb cut for an extra guest space, I get that that's legal, but it also takes out a street parking space, does it not? It does not? Okay. All right. I also want to note that the parking, it's legal, but it's not totally workable, and I'm referring specifically to the parking for units 5 and 6 and units 10 and unit 1. I'm going in clockwise order, sorry. A2.5. It's not impossible, but it's legal, but I don't think it's really, it's not super workable. So for unit 6 and for unit 5, there is a protrusion, we'll call it, or it's technically, I think architecturally be called an obstruction behind this, in which there would be a multiple point turn. If you look at this line 5 here that runs over to the kind of center of the middle, they'd have to back up. And again, maybe it's not the end of the world, but I'm thinking about the people who will end up living in these units. So I just want to state it for the record again. It is legal. They're the correct size as per the code. Same with units 10 and unit 1. I wouldn't want to try to back my car up out. And there is, again, a protrusion, like there's a 41 square foot room next to both of those, and for powder room. And again, I'm just thinking about the people who would end up living there. I also want to say, for the record, that while this may have an exemplary design designation for the outside, the inside of this building is not exemplary design. There's nothing exemplary about them. I think that the rooms are small, and I think that the unit sizes are awkward, and I'm hopeful that some of the things that we're working on here will allow our developers and applicants to create projects that are maybe a little more appropriate for the site. This kind of maxes everything out, and those are all my comments. I just wanted to state them for posterity.
Thank you. Any others?
I do have one more question for the architect and for staff.
Okay.
In addition to my comments, so.
You have a question for the architect? You want there to come forward?
It's a question for, sure. It's a question for the architect as well as staff.
Excuse me, I'm going to have to reopen the public hearing if you want to address her.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'll do that.
It can be just staff if I don't necessarily need the architect.
Okay, then you could address staff.
Okay, sorry. And I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier. Is there a definition in our code for public space? Excuse me, private space, in the sense that obviously people have balconies side by side, there's a little wall, you know, balconies are run up against each other all the time in all kinds of buildings. But in this particular building, those center balconies actually face each other. And I mean, you could literally share your guacamole just reaching over the space because they're so close to each other, at least perception in the plans. So my question is, how are we defining private open space? Because to me, that doesn't seem very private. You would almost have to choose, I get odd nights, you get even nights, in order to have privacy in those spaces.
This isn't really right on target for this project. This is something that maybe you want to address the...
Well, no, there's there's front
Right,
face.
but you're talking about as general, like how do we in general
Well,
deal with
but it
this?
applies to this project.
Okay.
Because there's balconies that face each other, correct?
Yeah, so the way that we interpret private open space is just that it's not available to anyone outside of that unit, but it doesn't pertain to views into the space or being across from each other or anything like that. It just means that the space is solely available to that unit.
Okay. I just wanted to have it kind of stated for the record because that just doesn't seem very private to me. Okay. I would agree with Commissioner Jones about the parking. I think I really want to thank the applicant for taking into account all of the comments that everybody made and making adjustments, opening up the balconies a little bit to at least the perceived mass of the building is a little bit less. I will personally say I don't find it architecturally to my personal taste. I'm mostly concerned about the fact that because it's so large, we don't have sufficient space for parking the entire building inside the building, and that we're taking up important setback/green space with parking, and that if this had been downsized to fit more appropriately into the space, even by one unit, it could have fit more appropriately, especially on that tight corner lot. So that being said, those are my comments.
I tend to agree with both of commissioners that have spoken. It seems like, again, we have a building that is maxing out every inch of space that they could pursuant to the code and sacrificing, I think, the livable space and the design inside. I hope that we don't see this too much more and that people are starting to have an awareness that people want to have more livable space, not just little rooms that are really hard to furnish and hard to live in. And just to max out to the very edge of every property line, I think is unfortunate because we don't have beautiful buildings that we could have that if people were more aware of buildings that have more appeal. That's my thought. Anybody else? So do we have, okay, go ahead.
I want to take a moment to apologize to Lori and Andrea for the tone which was used in our last meeting when your project came up. I found the tone disrespectful, and frankly, I was embarrassed. And I hope that the commission can find a better way to deliver their comments in the future. I quite like this project, and I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of floor plans. We need to be thinking about space more economically, and I believe that the City of West Hollywood micro units are definitely the way that we need to go. Larger units aren't necessarily the solution. What we need to do is rethink how much space one or two people need to live and how much you need to store. So in that regards, I think this sets a good precedent for the City of West Hollywood.
Thank you. Adam?
I would like to say that I really appreciate the applicant taking my concerns about the fence. I don't know if anyone else shared those, but I raised them and they were addressed, and I appreciate that. I asked the question about the planter boxes because I really believe that I have noticed, and I live on the east side, that as the transient problem increases, the more we open up our front yards, actually the less people hang out there because there's not places to hide. That's been my experience on the east side. So I resist this idea of building walls against the sidewalk, and our general plan suggests that we're supposed to have eyes on the street. I think this compromise generally reaches that because I'm a short guy, I'm 5'7", and I would be able to see over this fence, but it would be enough of a barrier that I couldn't just walk into somebody's yard. So I think that it addresses the issues of the neighborhood mostly. I know that from some of the notes we received from the neighbors, it doesn't address it entirely, but it also helps with the concept of people being able to look out onto the street and in that sense keep their neighborhood safe as well. So I think that it actually accomplishes, in my view, what the neighbors are trying to get at. So I like that. I would love if the planter boxes were down because I believe that makes more of a walkable neighborhood. In that I walk 2 dogs 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night. And when I walk them, you know, when you have a narrow sidewalk, one of you's walking into the gutter, or and if there's a planter box there, I've perched on the side of a planter box before. So I like the idea of lowering them. I wouldn't necessarily condition it to that extent, but I would like that, and that's my personal preference. I don't know that I would have called this project exemplary, but I do like the project, and I think that I can support it. But the specific exemplary designation is something I had a little bit of heartache with.
Okay. I would support your comments about the fence. I agree that it should be lower. It opens up the space more back to eyes on the street. And that my only comment about the planter boxes is, especially given how proximate that is to the sidewalk, if you would put those plants on at sidewalk level, they'll be destroyed in moments. And speaking as someone who gardens her parkway, that has dogs, et cetera, walking around on the plant materials, I think you will find that it will look better having some elevation. Now, the question maybe is how high it's elevated, but having some elevation in the planter box will protect the plantings and provide for more longevity of the space to look nice, or you'll be constantly replacing the plant materials. I agree with you otherwise, absolutely. I'd rather have it, you know, more open space down lower, but I think from a practical standpoint, the planter bed is probably going to be a better choice.
Okay, well, I don't believe we need to condition anything with regard to that. Just suggestions. I'm sure the staff and architect will take that into account. Okay, we had a couple of changes to the proposition. Could you read them to us, and then perhaps we can get a motion?
So condition 7.14 shall read, there shall be a minimum 6-foot tall landscape hedge at planting along the north and west property lines to mitigate privacy impacts to adjacent neighbors. And then condition 8.17, new condition, any change to rooftop projections shall be considered a major change and be approved by the Planning Commission.
Does that cover everything? Okay, so Commissioner Altschuld has made a motion and seconded.
The motion is to approve the staff recommendation with the added conditions that Ms. Yelton just recited.
Thank you. And seconded by Commissioner Guy.
And the motion passes, 6 ayes, 1 no by Commissioner Hoopengarner. The resolutions the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about a waiver of fee.
Thank you. So item number 10B, 1257 North Sweetser, for those of you who might have been interested in this project, did, on recommendation of staff, continue to January 18th. And it will be renoticed at that time. Then moving on to item 10C, 8462 Sunset Boulevard. I believe that there was a request to continue this item to a date uncertain.
And by consensus, it will be continued.
And by consensus, we can continue that. Okay? Moving on to item 11, new business, there is none. Unfinished business, item 10, there is none. Nothing on the excluded consent calendar. Any items from staff?
Just that the next two planning commission meetings have been canceled for the holidays. We'll be back on January 18th.
Okay, and do we have any items from the public at this time?
No public comment.
No public comment. Any items from commissioners?
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. We won't be back until after the holidays, so happy New Year, and we'll see you on January 18th, where we have, at this time, 4 items on the agenda, well, 5 now. So I will adjourn the meeting then until January 18th, that's a Thursday, beginning at 6:30 in this same auditorium. Good night, everybody.
You said 7, and it's 7:13, so we almost made it.
I was just noticing.
Yeah.